Restaurant Unstoppable, inspire, empower, and transform the industry. With excitement, allow me to introduce to you today's guest, former CEO and co-founder of Tender Greens and co-author of 10-Year Plan and current managing director of Cohere, Erik Oberholtzer. Erik, my man, are you feeling unstoppable today?
I feel like a freight train.
Yes, dude. I cannot wait to get into this conversation. And it's crazy to think that you're on the show way back in 2016. That was episode 277. And I totally forgot that you put Mario Del Perro on my radar and you called him out to be a featured guest on the show. And I'm so happy you did, because he ended up being an incredible guest. I've had him on the show twice since then. And that led to me meeting Donald Moore, the partner at Food Group and the former chief executive culinary officer for the Cheesecake Factory. All those episodes were because of you, man. And they were just such gold interviews. So I just can't say thank you enough. But today we're here to talk about you and to kind of pick up the conversation and to discuss what you're truly passionate about today, which is regenerative farming and biodiversity and food transparency. But let's get that motivational, inspirational ball rolling with a success quote or mantra. What do you got for us?
You know, historically, it was always the slow and easy wins the race. It really speaks to slow, disciplined, very intentional and steady movement forward. More recently, I would say progress over perfection. So many people get just caught up in purity and perfection, and it inhibits the important steps towards some aspirational goal. So really falling in love and embracing version 0.0, version 0, version 1, when things are kind of sloppy and iterative. So I think those two are really key to how I look at business and how I look at life.
I love that. And it kind of reminds me of your former business partner, Dane Meyer. And what he says is just that constant, gentle pressure, just keep showing up, keep pushing, have clarity in purpose, in values, and just keep going. And before you know it, you'll get there.
That's right.
I love it, man. Great way to get this thing started. So let's go back to 2016 when we last had you on the show. You had 24 locations. What happened thereafter? And then we already talked to your partner, David Dressler, and we dove into this, but I think it'd be really interesting to kind of get a little bit of perspective from you of what that last 4 years was like at Tender Green.
Yeah, that was just post transaction. So we had done the exit round, and things changed for all of us. We really stepped on the gas to really accelerate growth. We focused on the East Coast, which was a heavy lift. And we started to bring in some external talent at the C level, and it began to sort of change the dynamic for the three of us, me, Matt, and David. And over time, I think all of us began to feel as though we were losing the energy of entrepreneurs and running a big company with a lot of complexity and some external pressure that was really centered on growth and profit. And over time, I, Matt, and David began to imagine what life would look like post Tender Greens. So I stepped aside as CEO at the end of 2018, okay. Partly because I chose to stay on the East Coast, and just partly because I felt, I was like a starting pitcher who in, the seventh or eighth inning was feeling as though his arm was getting tired and it was time to come off the mound. So we brought Daniel Bruno in, and got her trained up to take over.
I don't know if you're aware, but I had her on the show as well.
A lot of energy, huh?
Oh my gosh, she's a lot of fun. Yeah, it was great. It was a great interview. So you said it started to change, started to feel different. What was different for you? What was different about the way you were living, your purpose and everything that we weren't getting anymore that you were getting when it was just the three of you in like 24 and fewer locations?
Yeah, I think the foundational difference was that we were now answering to a fairly sophisticated board that had some heavy influence, and very smart guys who were I think trying to be helpful, but that oversight and the reporting structure uh, just shifted the dynamic a bit. So I think over time, where we would have operated more from intuition and our gut, we were now hesitating, questioning our gut against some of the guidance that we might have been getting. And then you fold in some senior executive level folks from big companies like Starbucks or Yum Brands or whatever. The conventional thinking against our sort of founder entrepreneurial mindset began to feel as though it was in conflict.
Mm.
And we were really trying to sort of be good partners to the new dynamic. And I think I'll speak for myself, lost ourself, lost our true north, and lost our center a bit in that.
So this is interesting, and I'm so happy. I know we're here to talk about regenerative farming and food transparency, and we're going to get there. But I think that what I think you and David did really well in 10-year plan that a lot of other books don't capture is the different phases that you go through as a company grows from one location to how many locations were they at in 2018 or 2020? Was it 2018 when you walked away?
Yeah. So we were at, I think it was 34 restaurants at that point.
Yeah, and how, I mean, there's just like your role as an owner evolves and changes over that time. We focus a lot on the one to, from one location to like say 5 locations, then 5 locations to 10 locations. But when it gets to that 24 location mark, and you have to start bringing in outside support, and I mean, it's kind of that same pattern you see where you got to know when to get out of the way, and surround yourself with people who have experience doing this or are just better at doing it. And I don't know if I don't know exactly where I'm going with this, but I guess what I'm saying is like your book just highlights from your perspective, from an owner's perspective, the evolution so well. And I think for any other reason, you have to go get this book just for that reason, because you go through, you spell out the growing pains, right? And it was just really impactful. So, I mean, and that's one of the things I've noticed too, is that when companies grow, they there's almost a sense of like they're losing a little bit of what made them so special in the first place. And are you suggesting that might have happened here? I don't want to put words into your mouth.
I think we always related ourselves to a band, and musicians start in the garage and then they start playing the local clubs, and if they're lucky, they start opening for their heroes, and eventually the big record labels come along and sign them, and now they're opening up at Coachella, and they're on the circuit, and they're getting airtime, but in signing that record deal, or maybe 3 record deal, now they have to reach a much broader audience, which comes with filters, and you have to do music for people outside of your core enthusiasts. So oftentimes, things can get a little diluted down, and there were things that we did, decisions that we made that were designed for a national expansion, were designed to make it easier to market and talk about what we were doing in a clear, concise, and repetitive way. And I'll speak for myself. I was digging deeper and deeper and deeper into the topic that we're going to talk about, which is regenerative agriculture, agrobiodiversity, and the role of food in all of these things that we should be concerned about, whether it's human health, cultural diversity and expression, or planetary health. And as I was going deeper, and let's say even more fringe and esoteric, the brand was having to stay connected to an audience that was, maybe a little bit broader and not quite there yet. So there was a little tension between where I felt we could take the brand and our responsibility as a larger restaurant group to assert our influence, our supply chain choices, our voice, and our leadership position to advance the food system. And instead, we were, I think, I don't want to say diluting it down, but we went through a period where we were just really focused on growth and maybe playing a little bit too safe.
So I want to make sure I understand. Your focus has always been, it was very clear that you wanted to advance the food system and you wanted to use your restaurant to help good food get to more people. That was always kind of one of the driving forces for you. When you brought on the new team members, the focus shifted to expansion, not so much serving the mission that you felt was close and near and dear to your heart.
I think we never lost sight of the mission and, really lifting our people. That never went away. I don't want to suggest that it took the wrong turn. I think as a founder, as a chef, and as an entrepreneur, I was always looking to push it to the edge as it relates to impact and better food systems.
When you say push it to the edge, are you talking about this mindset of changing the food system?
Yeah. Yes. Wherever the food system is, nudging it further. It's that sort of constant pressure that progress towards a better tomorrow. And that's hard once you reach a certain size. You see that with Starbucks. Starbucks was incredibly innovative in the early days, and as they expanded, I think some of that shifted. Chipotle the same way, and we'll see what happens with Sweetgreen. I think they're in a very powerful leadership position right now.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see what they do with spice and those robotics, and I'm following that pretty closely.
Yeah, they're a really dynamic, interesting group, and I think they're right-minded. They live and express their values, but they have the pressure of Wall Street also. So it's fun to watch.
Yeah. So the underlying message I got is that as you scale, innovation gets more difficult.
I think so. Yeah, because you no longer can pivot and dodge and make little mistakes and recover.
It's like a big ship takes a long time to turn, and you can have a little jet ski right next to it doing all types of flips and waves and having a grand old time. It can turn on a dime. The bigger you are, the more momentum you have. One change has to echo throughout the entire organization, and that takes time.
100%.
Yeah. So so I guess what I'm concluding is that for you, what really lights you up, what really drives you is the innovative part of this, is the staying on the leading edge and being staying at that edge, and not and the focus went from being innovative to let's take this across the country.
That's right. And that's when, bringing in somebody like Danielle Bruno made sense, because that's what she does. She comes in once a business or brand is established and helps it grow. And she really led with confidence. She was quick. She was smart. She wasn't of the food space, but what we liked about Daniela was that she had been, on the disruptive side with Apple retail. She had been on the disrupted, the legacy brand,
Coffee?
that coffee, yeah, Pete's,
Coffee was it? Yeah, that's right.
yeah. So Pete's Coffee, in some ways, we saw ourselves in Pete's Coffee, that they were the OG. They were before Starbucks, and yet Starbucks, was innovative and such a huge cultural influence, while Pete's kind of stayed crunchy and really close to their founding values, but almost to a fault. And then obviously the work that she did with Dry Bar, which was this clean, modern, millennial brand that was, I think, brilliant, and she was and carried a lot of the complexity that we do in the restaurant business. It's high touch. You have people. So she just had these experiences outside of the restaurant space that were relevant to Tender Greens, because we're all servicing the same customer.
Yeah, and in the book, I can't remember if it was your words or if it was David's words, where he was getting mentored by Danny Meyer, and Danny explains he uses the analogy of a growing tree and how people are like bark. And as the tree grows, bark needs to be shed to make room for growth. And you look at your team members, and this applies, and that's where he was it you or David that mentioned this?
I don't know if that was, Danny shared that.
It probably echoed many times. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's this mentality. But I think where I'm going with this is you have to become self-aware and recognize when you're the bark and it's time for you to be shed, so the company that you created can go on and do bigger things, right?
Yeah, and I work a lot with founders in growth phase now, and that's part of it, is getting them ready for the eventuality that the business is going to, if they're successful, the business outgrows them.
Yeah, but here we are though, and if you look at why we're all here, if according to Chip Connolly, we're all here to self-actualize, right? We're all here to find our definite purpose in the world. And since shedding your responsibilities with Tender Green, you now get to focus on exactly what it is that got you started in the first place, with what drove you to be so successful with Tender Greens in the first place, is just being innovative around the broken food system and injecting integrity back into the food system. So where were you in 2018? What was your knowledge of the food system then, and to kind of take us chronologically over what you've learned since then and what you're trying to share and how you're trying to transform the industry?
Yeah, I was living in New York, and getting deeper and deeper and deeper into biodiversity in the food system, regenerative organic agriculture. I had joined the board of the Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania, which is really the co-author of organic certification in the US, and now ROC, which is the regenerative organic certification with Patagonia and Dr. Bronner's, and then the work with the Crop Trust, which is missioned to really protect the world's crop diversity, biodiversity, in the food system. So they manage the 11 international vaults around the world, and also the Svalbard seed vault, the global seed vault in Norway. And I was, stepping from this platform of, local food systems, organic agriculture, and heirloom varietals that were in the peak of season, just for a moment, into the next layer, which was really the genetics of the seeds and the history behind them, and the importance of diversity in the seed stock, so that we have a more resilient food system moving forward. And then also the importance of soil health and everything that the regenerative agriculture movement was focused on, which was not just sustaining, but rebuilding. So rebuilding ecosystems, rebuilding our waterways, rebuilding soil complexity and health, so that we have less need for chemical inputs, and agriculture is working in harmony with the natural world, not in an antagonistic or damaging way.
Yeah, and I love this idea of working with harmony in the natural world. You think of like the Mayans, right, and what they were doing in the Amazon jungle, and just how they just coexisted with nature, and it provided everything they needed in abundance. But I think it's, and I don't want to get too far off track, but what you're saying, I think, also applies to humans. And this idea of studying, you're studying nature and how it existed naturally in the, with no human footprint, and what was happening in the soil and the biodiversity. But also we can study what we were 10,000 years ago as humans, and what made us happy. And I think there's so much to be learned about where we're going to go in the future by studying our past. And I think it's fascinating, but keep going.
Yeah, I mean, just to speak to people and the importance of diversity, if you look at the urban world, you look at the great cities of the world, they're incredibly diverse. Every representative of the planet is in any major city, and with that, language, culture, religion, that makes a city life so dynamic and interesting, and in constant movement, versus the suburban world, which is often kind of like monocrop. You have suburban communities that too often look the same. The people are from the same place. They tend to look and think the same, and their retail and their shopping and their entertainment is maybe one note. And that's I live in Princeton, New Jersey, so I live outside the city.
I live in New Hampshire, so I'm picking up what you're putting down, man.
Yeah, so, and I'm not saying one is better than the other, but if we think about that diversity of the city versus the one note of certain rural and suburban communities, we can compare that to agriculture. And you have biodiversity in agriculture, where you might have a farm with many different products, both plant and animal. And the more you have, the more they work together and once you find that balance, there's a great movie called The Biggest Little Farm, and it really sort of captures both the romance, but also the struggle, and ultimately the value of diverse regenerative agriculture versus what much of the global food system is based on, which is monocropping. And if anybody's ever driven through the Midwest, it's hundreds of thousands of acres of genetically modified corn or soy or whatever. And there's nothing good about that for the soil, for the natural ecosystem. The only thing that is allowed to thrive is that one crop.
Yeah.
Everything else is tamed.
Yeah. And I mean, I can't, like, it just keeps coming up, this idea that what you see in nature, there's these patterns, and these patterns apply to us. And for some reason, humans like to think that there's a line drawn between us and nature, that we aren't animals, that these rules don't apply to us. And it's just kind of silly when you think about it. But you see, like, diversity, I think, is such a key to so many, opens so many doors, and it makes so many things better. Like you think of a restaurant, right? You don't want 10 chefs in a restaurant. That's not going to be a successful restaurant. You want a chef, an operations person, a marketing person, an accounting person. Like we are tribal, and every tribe member in that 50 or 150 group band or whatever, however big they were, they all had a purpose, and they all contributed to the greater cause of the tribe to, survive. But every person would contribute, and every person. So it's the same thing in soil. Every microbe in soil has a purpose, and it's like a little jungle in the dirt, and when you strip the response, when you start stripping these microbes from the dirt, and like the whole system crumbles, because everybody had a purpose. It's like pulling the chef out of the restaurant or the front of house manager out of the restaurant. You need all the elements for it to work. And that's kind of what I'm hearing from you. Is that accurate? Is that a good analogy?
Yeah, you destroy one component and the entire system begins to fail, which then what we do. So traditionally what we do is we strip the soil, and then we add the stuff back in that we want, our plants or animals to thrive on. And, those plants or animals might thrive, but everything else suffers. And then ultimately, you strip the soil, or you poison the waterways to the point where it is very hard to reverse. So, we see the pollution and the toxicity of our streams and rivers. We see the bleaching and acidification of our oceans, and then that ends up in our fish supply, which ends up in our sushi, which causes health problems, and all this stuff compounds. So, and if we just look at one little component of it, it doesn't tell the full story. You have to look at the entire system. And once you start to look at the entire system and then come back to your own connection to that, whether as a chef, a restaurateur, or a diner, you begin to realize that maybe your food choices matter. Because at the end of the day, if we're sponsoring the agriculture that's damaging the planet.
By sponsoring, you mean purchasing the food that's damaging the planet?
100%.
Okay.
Then it's on us as individuals. It's on us as restaurateurs. It's on us as an industry. And that's where, I'm saying we are complicit in the problems that we now face, and the next generation is screaming about, and rightfully so, because our behavior is antagonistic to and in conflict with the world that we want to live in. So, whether it's packaging waste related to convenience culture and delivery and takeout, or it's the reliance on soy, wheat, corn, and rice, and
yeah,
outside of those.
So I always shrink, like I just like whenever people talk about the move towards like the Beyond Burger or whatever, this type of food that is basically supporting mono farming and needs mono farming to exist, whether I don't know whether it's soy milk or the Beyond Burger or the Impossible Burger or oat milk or whatever it is. And you have a lot of like vegetarians or people who are using the excuse for being a vegetarian, or the excuse that they don't want to kill animals, but animals are the reason why we're destroying the environment, so I'm gonna go eat a Beyond Burger and that's gonna be better. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a really good point. So right after this, I'm on a call. I'm part of a cohort that is really trying to define the practices and principles of the alternative protein space. So the founders of a lot of these brands are part of this group. It's sort of facilitated, came out of Google Food Labs. And one of the big issues that I've been driving is transparency, because this space enjoys both a health and an environmental halo that, in my view, is not accurate. One, because of what you just shared, a lot of the core ingredients for Beyond and Impossible and others are soy-based, are wheat-based, and they're coming from sources that are monocropped. They might be genetically modified, and for the vegans who don't want to use honey because they feel it's damaging to it exploits the bees. Well, glyphosate kills entire bee populations along with the butterflies and everything else. So I would argue that some of these substitutes are worse for the ecosystem and the environment than a pastured animal. But what we're doing in this group is agreeing to report with transparency so that there's truth in the food system. And then consumers can decide, but at least they're not getting the marketing spin only, they're getting the truth. And with blockchain, there are ways to do that fairly clearly. And then from a health perspective, a lot of the stuff I don't register as nutrition or food. I've worked with the yellow peat isolate and the gluten flakes, and truthfully, I find it hard to turn that into anything good. And when I've given it to my chickens, the chickens won't eat it.
That's not a sign. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, chickens eat everything, including chicken, but they won't eat this stuff. So it tells you something.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned blockchain and how blockchain could help with this. And I think that for people who aren't completely familiar with blockchain, you think of like this leading like technology that's developing. How does that have anything to do with farming, and why will that help with food transparency?
So, to put it simply, and I don't understand the actual technology, but the way it works is you're a farmer or fisherman, and there is a ledger of transaction. So the fisherman, let's say, is on a little boat in the South China Sea, catches some fish, and there's another boat that comes and buys that fish. There's a chain of custody there. It was caught here with a line or a net or whatever, and the price at transaction was X. And every point along the value chain until it gets to your plate or to your market shelf is recorded.
Every transaction, basically.
Every transaction. And the way that works is you've got the blockchain where these ledgers are recorded, and they can't be altered. And then a group like, let's say, Visa, or some banking function will sort of sponsor this so that people are being compensated for sort of recording this on the blockchain, and they can do it through a cell phone. And there are some pilots out there that are doing this both on the seafood side and the plant side. And what that means to consumers, whether you're a purchasing agent for a big company or a consumer shopping the shelves is with your phone, you can scan a QR code and have access to that ledger, that chain of custody, so that there is full transparency. And the next step is there might be an option someday where a consumer can essentially tip the person who sowed the seeds or caught that original fish somewhere.
I think this is huge for, I think, where I believe the future of the restaurant industry and just the world is going, where I hope it's going, where I'm championing it to go, is towards this idea of conscious capitalism. And when you have that food transparency, when you have just transparency in general, the consumer can make much more intentional purchasing decisions. And I think what you're going to start to see as we go into the future is people, we're just starting to realize, like, hey, we all want to be happy, and we can really achieve happiness more simply than we would think. You take care of your most basic human needs, food and shelter, and beyond that, it's just feeling like you're loved, you belong, that you're growing, you're learning, and that you have your definite purpose in life. Food and shelter are the biggest challenges. And I know some numbers that I echo, and I was hoping you could support some of these numbers. You probably know far more. I know you know far more about this stuff than I do. I've heard that 98% of the world's pollution comes from the food system. Is that accurate? Can you support that number? Have you heard that?
Well, I don't think that's accurate. It's about 30% of sort of carbon emissions, let's say, which would be defined as
food productions makes up 30% of carbon emissions. Is that what you're?
That's right. And that might be, tilling soil and stripping it and releasing carbon. It might be related to logistics, transportation, production, packaging, all of that stuff.
Well, then I'm assuming cows are a big part of that too, or just livestock.
Yes, for, a whole host of reasons, right? They've been vilified. So, that might be clearing massive amounts of rainforest to convert to pasture. Mm-hmm. That might be growing corn or soy to feed animals. It's not. I think it's kind of laughable, honestly, around the cows fart more than anything else, in the methane. Yeah, whatever. I think it's habitat destruction, and these massive amounts of land that are dedicated to animal feed and animal ranges. So yes, animal production has a big part to play, but so does chemical farming as well, because to your point about pollution, beyond carbon, a lot of these toxins end up in the aquifer, end up in the streams, end up in rivers, and end up in ocean, and it damages or kills the native plants and animals and critters that are in these important waterways, and it just compounds and compounds and compounds until you're in the ocean. So
taking into consideration the cost of moving the food around thereafter, the cost of packaging, which is a huge violation of just like all the plastics and packaging and styrofoam. Maybe not so much styrofoam, but definitely the plastics. That you can't even you can't not buy plastic today, even if you don't want to. Like you open a box and there's plastic inside of it. There's like no way of knowing like if you're supporting the system or not. But I don't know. I don't know where I heard that number, but it's when you think about all the different things that go into, growing, then packaging, and then I don't like 98%. Where else would the pollution come from? I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm just saying, what is that number? Do you know what it is?
Well, I think 98% is human activity, is what I would say. And, energy is probably number two. So if you've got food systems, right, as as 30% energy in all of its forms. So, strip mining of coal, you talk about crypto and blockchain and the amount of energy that is being used, in these systems. Energy is a huge one. And then, I would venture to say habitat loss and human activity, as we grow out of our urban core and take over more and more farmland or forests to build houses and logistics warehouses and whatever, it is so disruptive to the natural environment. And look at a map of 100 years ago and one today, not just in the US or Europe, but look at the developing world and how the population is expanding, and they all need to, we all need to be housed, and that housing really stresses the natural environment, the migration patterns, waterways, water usage, all of that.
Yeah. So what is the solution? I mean, if we're here today to learn more, I think you've explained do you feel like you need to explain what biodiversity is better, or what regenerative farming is better? Have you spelled that out enough to this point? Do you think you need to go further into what those things are?
What I'm going to say about regenerative, and there's a lot of internal debate over sort of exactly what makes regenerative, but I think the important thing for people to understand is that as a function, regeneration or regenerative agriculture aims to build back better, to use a Biden term. So building back better, improving health, not just sustaining or maintaining, but building back, improving soil health, the health of the waterways, the health of our bodies, the health of our culture, the health of a food system, so it's more resilient. That's sort of the regenerative movement, which is different than sustainability, which it was, let's just not screw it up any more than we already have. Let's just hold the line. This is, we've crossed the line. Now we need to build back. We need to improve. We need to heal. In terms of biodiversity, I think the easiest way to understand it is there are two key points. One would be going deep into an ingredient. So everybody knows what a tomato is. And now everybody understands, I think, what heirloom tomatoes are. Heirloom tomatoes are diversity within a single ingredient, right? And I think we can all agree that diversity is delicious, that it makes summer salads a lot better than a 5x6 tomato. And then there's diversity across ingredients. So 60% of our entire food system is based on 4 ingredients: soy, corn, wheat, and rice.
Wow.
And it's in everything. That's not diverse, that's not interesting, that's not exciting, and it's not good from a nutritional context. It's not interesting from a chef or a culinary perspective, and culturally it doesn't really represent every nuance of the world. So adding more diversity to our food system is like adding quinoa. There was a time when nobody knew what quinoa is. Now it's everywhere. Or amaranth, or fonio, or crickets, or whatever. So adding more ingredients into our pantry, both from fresh and preserved, is another way to look at diversity. And that diversity then plays out in the fields, in the ecosystem, and that diversity in nature is better for a diverse and vibrant and resilient, not just food system, but planet in general.
Yeah. So one of the things I echo often, I think generally speaking, people are good. We all, for the most part, most people were good. We have good intentions. But we also know that people are inherently lazy. Like we take the path of least resistance. It's just built into our DNA. We don't want to use our brain. We don't want to change. Change is very expensive as in terms of energy, the cost of energy, the mental energy to change your habits. It's a path of resistance, and it's people generally don't take that path unless there's something in it for them and it's immediate. Like they want an immediate return on their investment. They don't think 10 years down the road, what about like our children in the future? We want results now. And I think that communicating to the general public that, hey, if you choose to eat this type of food, it's the best thing for you. And you've been seeing a trend ever since you opened your restaurant in 2006, where people want to put the best food in their system, in their bodies. It's like this health craze that's going on right now. And I think that this might be the key to getting people to actually take action to say, hey, if you want to feel the best thing you can put into your body is something that was grown with this fill in the blank. How would you say, like, grown with what?
Well, I think grown with love and care and
regenerative best practices,
Sure, and that translates into love and care.
Yeah.
So whatever you call it, it's really taking care of the animal or the plant and the property that you're tending to. Where we come in as an industry, where I show up in this conversation is flavor. So it has to be delicious. It has to be relatable, and it has to be accessible, both in availability, but also in price and speed. And you're right. The enemy is the convenience culture, because convenience culture is so stitched into American culture that we order on our app and an Amazon truck shows up, or Uber Eats, or whoever, and that may feel like we've now outsourced cooking and shopping to somebody else, but the amount of packaging waste, the energy that it takes to get here, the disconnect between our food and where it comes from and who does it, I think it's problematic. So I think flavor, and then also the romance and the importance socially and culturally of breaking bread together, sitting around a table. It's something that's been, I don't want to say lost, but threatened over the last 50 or 60 years, probably longer. And with the slow food movement, I think, and the Food Network, there was this surge of interest and excitement. And I think COVID in some ways deepened that, because people were forced to cook at home and nurture their sourdough, or maybe plant their own victory garden, get some chickens so that they felt as though they had some control over their food. And I'm hopeful that this time to really think about it and also connect with food, that some people will stick with it and continue to learn and develop, and slowly will move in this direction of resilient, regenerative lifestyles.
Yeah.
But I worry about convenience culture, big food, big business, whether it's impossible or beyond, saying, okay, people just feed them burgers, plant-based, and they'll be happy. Nobody has to know, the formula, or that it's really not, awesome nutrition.
If people are listening to this and they are convinced they want to be a part of the solution, they want to be a part of the change, where do we start? Like, how do we start doing better today?
Yeah, I think, and I work with so many founders and entrepreneurs who come to me with that question. I want to do better, not sure how to start. Can you help me? And what I've done is, first you start with with self-awareness, essentially a SWOT analysis, right? Where are we today? And it's checking in with yourself as an entrepreneur, and checking in with the business, and taking inventory. Here's what we're doing, here's what we believe in, here's what we're doing. And then once you have that, being clear on where you would like to be aspirationally. So you pick a point in the future. It could be next quarter, it could be by the end of the year, it could be in 10 years. But choose some goals that are achievable but stretch, and then start to look at the priorities in front of you, and I start with the the easy button, or the no-brainers, what we might call the low-hanging fruit. There is no real conflict or tension. The choice is clear. You just have to make it.
So give us, like, list those things, like those clear choices that might not be so obvious for everyone.
So that might be, I'll just take a symbolic one, moving from a plastic straw to a paper straw, or a truly compostable straw. It's a no-brainer. Just do it. Mm-hmm. It really isn't going to move the needle. You can there are great alternatives to plastic. So just do it. Another one might be looking at the dirty dozen and clean 15, and looking at that list, and looking at your product list and saying, okay, are there ingredients that we could move towards organic, because these are the ones that are most heavily treated if conventional. Pretty easy choice. It's clear, and it's sort of packaged in a way that you can really communicate it to the team, to consumers, to your board if you need to, or your finance team. And it's just a matter of doing it. These are the big movers that are available both organically and conventionally.
So real quick question on that. Is there a difference between organic food and food grown and using biodiversity best practices?
So, there are certifications, and the organic certification is flawed, but sort of the best we have in terms of third party. If you are sourcing locally, and you can go to the farm, you get to know the farmer, and you can see for yourself what their practices are. We've always favored that over certification. Certification is important if you can't vet the producer yourself. So, short of visiting the farm, the certifiers certify that certain chemicals aren't being used, or they're not genetically modified, et cetera. It's just it gives you a level of confidence that the things that don't align with your values aren't being used. In terms of biodiversity, sort of, or regenerative, it again, this is where sticking to your local food system, so you can really build this relationship and visit these farms, I think is important. Otherwise, you really have to dig a little deeper, because the food system is a little still opaque. So it takes some work, upfront work. But once you set these relationships, then you're good, and then it's a matter of communicating it truthfully out to your customers and your team, so that you're honest and true. The second, once you get through these sort of easier lifts that truthfully don't cause a lot of pain or suffering, you might start to look at things that are challenging, that the choice is clear if you've sort of set your values and where you want to go, but it may cause some friction. So that might be changing vendors, it may be changing specs, it might cost a little bit more. So you might have to find other forms of efficiency. So that might be moving from, grain-fed to pasture-raised animals, for example. Or it might mean moving from a conventional potato to something that is heirloom, that from a very specific farm, like a Wiser farm out in California, or Norwich Meadows here on the East Coast. These will cost a little bit more. They might take a little bit of effort to set up. Supply chain needs to be nurtured a little bit, and it requires leadership, because there will be pain points and friction points on the journey. But the payoff is you're living your values, and I believe you're now not just competing, but you're differentiating your brand.
Yeah. And where are the pain points that we should be aware of, ready for, that you can identify?
One of the big pain points will oftentimes be cost. So, that's where you have to be creative and work with your producers. And are there ways to mitigate that by reducing packaging? We did that with Scarborough Farms, and reusable totes versus branded cardboard, which not unnecessary cost. Cutting out some of the hands in the supply chain, going direct versus through box in, box out food aggregators. That's part of the problem with the food system, is there are too many hands in the till. So if you can reduce both the distance traveled, right, shorten the supply chain, and eliminate all the unnecessary hands in the till, you can reduce cost without cutting quality. And it takes some work, and that's where the leadership matters. But it's also where you can differentiate and strengthen your brand, deepen the moat around supply chain.
Yeah. You mentioned not buying straws and plastic, making better purchasing decisions. Also, I think we need to cut out plastic bags and styrofoam. Can you get behind that?
It was behind that, 10 years ago. We have to do better than that. I think I'm on to circular economies, and there's a startup in New York called Delivery Zero. The idea is to replace the single-use to-go containers with reusable clamshells and soup containers, etc. And if we get broad adoption in these big cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York, where everybody agrees to use the same container, we can begin to cut down on, if you walk through Manhattan after lunch, the trash cans are just piled with compostable containers that never reach a compost facility. So the packaging waste and the cost to the business is absurd.
So get into that sort of stuff. What is the stuff that is like really changing the game? Who are the people that are doing things that if everybody got on board, not only would the world be a much cleaner place, much more sustainable place, but also it will lower our costs? If everybody's using, like, what percentage is packaging for a restaurant? Not huge, but it's it's a point, or one, at least a point, right?
It used to be a point. Now it's much higher because
the cost to do sustainable packaging is much higher.
But also the volume.
Mm.
It used to be, I mean, we started Tender Greens as a dine-in experience. It was never meant to be this sort of to-go delivery hub. And, I spoke to Harold, the new CEO of Tender Greens in Takaya yesterday. Delivery and delivery and pickup is now, I think, 60% of volume. It used to be like 10%. So it's insane. And all I see is waste. So I think, Delivery Zero is an example of, and there are a number of groups across the country trying to solve for this, but it takes systemic change. The cities have to buy in, the restaurants have to buy in, the consumer has to adopt.
I think that's the key one right there. I think we forget that the consumer controls everything. If we can convince the consumer, if we can educate the consumer, and that's why I say the restaurant, if you transform the restaurant industry, you transform the world. Because we have influence. We are the educators. We are the ones going to the consumer saying, cut the shit. Like, no, we're not doing this anymore. And here's why. And you're going to be okay with it, because we need to make change. And I think collectively people need to do this across the board, because I think it needs to be a group effort among the industry to try to be better. And I think that, I don't know, I think people in the industry are the best people. Restaurant people are the best people. They're influencers. They have the best values. I think we can change the world, but
1,000%. And I'd add in, the markets. I think Whole Foods deserves a lot of credit as being such a pioneer over the years. Now it has changed under the, control of Amazon, but a place like Whole Foods or Erewhon or some of these markets where if you don't have a reusable tote when you walk in, you feel like an absolute loser, right? Because there's this culture of care. It's an intentional community, and the expectation is that you're mindful enough to grab a reusable tote to carry your bags out and not use paper or plastic.
Mhm.
And I find if I go to a market like that and it wasn't planned and I don't have a reusable bag, either I'm walking out without a bag and trying to, get it to my car, or I feel a degree of shame and I'm apologetic. And I think that's important that we create this culture of care, and that if you're walking down the street in any city and you're not carrying a reusable container someday in the future, that you would sort of be a little embarrassed, a little shamed, because you're part of the problem, not the solution.
Yeah. Who's doing this well? If you could refer me to a person or a group, a restaurant group that's doing this well, who comes to mind?
So yesterday I was on, I'm part of the chief sustainability officer group for Food Tank, and the chief sustainability officer for Just Salads was on. And, I think they've really taken a leadership position. So they've, since they started, they had reusable Just Salad bowls that, people can transfer the salad, from the line into their bowls, and then wash them and bring them back for next use. So they're doing that, which is clunky and hard, and we all talk about doing it, but they're actually doing it. So I think it's worth celebrating. And then they also, I learned yesterday that they're working with Delivery Zero also. So they're trying to address this along the channels that are available. One, sort of native, and two, through a partner. And I don't know that they get enough credit for it, but I think they're worth celebrating, and they're doing the hard work to to fail or suffer through the friction because they believe that it's right. And I think it's admirable.
Who's Delivery Zero?
Delivery Zero is a startup based in Manhattan that is a delivery system, kind of like an Uber or Postmates or whatever, but they're not, they're not obsessed about the delivery. They're obsessed about the reusable containers. So what they do is they buy all of the containers, they give them to restaurants who participate, and they pass the cost on to the consumer, who gets credit if they return that container. The container's washed by Delivery Zero. So if you're a regular Delivery Zero consumer, you might, kind of like I don't know, nobody will remember this, but there was a time when dairies would deliver milk, and then you had empty milk bottles. They deliver the next round of milk and pick up the old ones, or in a restaurant, kegs. It's the same idea. So they'll, next time they come to deliver something to you, they pick up the used ones, sanitize them, and they get worked back in the system. I think they're durable up to 1,000 uses. So they can, withstand about 1,000 uses before, they're retired. Early days, I know a lot of people are piloting it. We'll see, but again, worth celebrating and worth keeping track of.
So the last thing I want to discuss before we open it up for Q&A is this idea of what's the major argument if we get some pushback with this being profitable. Why do you think food transparency will be or will make you more profitable?
Well, I think full food transparency or transparency in general is honesty, which translates into credibility, which translates into commitment and attachment and a sense of belief in a brand. So if you are clear and transparent, the relationship you develop with your consumers will be one of trust. And a brand that has trust has power. And as long as that trust isn't broken, it deepens commitment and consumption of that brand. I think Patagonia is a good example of a brand that, and Whole Foods those are two good brands that have been very open and honest about what they do, and people assign value, and you can get and to profitability, you then can charge a premium.
Yeah. And I think this is why, conscious capitalism is something that I think is very just interesting. This idea of having a purpose behind your business, a higher purpose, a mission. You have to bake this stuff into your culture. You can't just go buy reusable stuff and say, hey, we're going to do this. You have to put it front and center. This has to be at the front of who we are, why we exist. And what's going to happen, what you'll see is people who have your same values, who share your values, are going to come to you because it's really all about psychographics. People want to be seen in places that reinforce their personal identity and what they share. If I shop here, people are going to think this about me, right? What are your thoughts on that?
No, 100%. And where transparency plays I think a pivotal role in that is, without transparency, anybody can greenwash. Mm-hmm. And when brands are greenwashing or presenting really sharp false claims, then consumers are duped into buying into that, and therefore the the system collapses. With transparency, if you're dishonest, you're going to be outed.
Mm-hmm.
And
go ahead.
And so that holds people accountable to some degree.
Yeah. And I like the point you made with the NFTs. Did I get that backwards? I was NFTs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really interesting to see how that plays a role in the future in being able to trace things and reinforce this idea of just transparency. I'm excited for that. I know that we can do so much with NFTs, but I forget sometimes the ramifications, like the actual impact this new technology will have in the world we live in. So is there anything we have not discussed up to this point that you want to get out?
Well, we certainly talked about a lot, but now that you bring up NFTs, is something that I didn't fully understand until about a week ago. There's I think you're going to talk to him, this fly fish.
Next week. Yep.
I think it was the first time that I heard about an NFT that made sense to me and had a use case that I could relate to. And I think it's brilliant. I've been sort of sitting with it. It's another version of an exclusive club in a sense. So it's going to be, I can't wait to listen to that interview, because it's an interesting concept. Great way to raise money and create the sort of velvet rope experience with a restaurant.
So if we want to continue this conversation, I don't know if you're consulting on this matter, if you're helping restaurants get onboarded with more sustainable practices, what's the best way to connect with you?
On social, Erik Oberholtzer, LinkedIn or Instagram, directly, Erik, ERIK, at cohere.nyc. I'm working with quite a few founders of growth brands to help them navigate, all of these issues. And it's not easy. But if it was easy, then everybody'd do it. So this is an opportunity to lead for a lot of businesses. It's an opportunity to make real impact, and it's a real opportunity to not just live one's values, but differentiate a brand. Because if you can solve some of these issues, not on your own, but collaboratively with others in the industry, we can make a real difference. And I know that's your mission. How do we make big change, or what Google refers to as food shots? These are the moonshots in the food business that really will affect lasting multi-generational change.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that gets me really excited is just how resilient the earth is. When it gets what it needs, it can bounce back. Ecosystems can bounce back. And it just takes a group effort to let the earth do what it does. Do you ever think there's going to be a day where we see buffalo like roaming the plains again, and like there's just open borders and nature can just do what it does? Is that within our lifetime?
Well, I think Patagonia Provisions has done a lot with the buffalo and the Great Plains, because they're so important to the health of the grasses and the soil, and to the culture of a lot of Native Americans in the plains. So yes, I do think we'll continue to see buffalo herd and wolves and others that are reintroduced into the ecosystem, and we just have to find a way to work in harmony. I'll be honest, I've got 14 chickens outside. Yesterday I had 15. I didn't eat one, but a Cooper hawk keeps attacking my flock, and I have had to really strap them in. So I am dealing with it daily, and I can't fault the hawk for being a hawk. It's doing what it's doing, and we have coyotes and fox and raccoons and bobcats and all like chicken. So as much as I'd like to have my chicken out just moving about, it's for their own protection that I have to have a really secure run. And that's the other thing, this conflict between the wild and agriculture is real. And again, I encourage people to watch The Biggest Little Farm. I think it tells a beautiful story of regenerative agriculture and also some of the struggles of agriculture and the emotions of agriculture, but also the benefits.
Awesome. So I got to have you call somebody out before we say goodbye. Who do you respect and admire and think we should make an example of on the show? Last time you called out Mario Del Piero. He was amazing. Call somebody else out.
I was just up at Stone Barns, and this is probably an obvious one, but because of what we're talking about, Dan Barber and what they're doing at Stone Barns is just epic. We were up there for a full day, and I have to tell you, if I were 20 again, I would do whatever it took to go spend 3 years at Stone Barns and work every position, not just in the restaurant, but on the farm and learn everything that they're doing. And the thing is, you probably never stop learning because they are just innovating and doing such cutting edge stuff as it relates to regenerative agriculture. So just really amazed with that. And the other guy who I think has stood out from everybody else over the last year or so is Jose Andres. Different, but another example of how chefs can lead, while others might chase the headlines or the Twitter feeds. He's making the news, and it's really impressive what he's doing in Ukraine and other places. He sees a flare up in the world where people might be hungry, and he organizes, and he's the first guy on the ground. So really impressive. And I think all cooks and chefs and restaurateurs should look at both of these guys and ask themselves, where can I, lead?
Yeah. Thank you for setting the bar high for me. Dan Barber and Jose Andres, look out, guys. I'm coming after you. I'd love to get you on the show. And there is no questioning, my man. You are unstoppable. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us again.
Oh, thank you. Pleasure.
Cheers.